Every day, the number of people who have gone missing increases, and more unsolved crime cases get added to those that seem to have no explanation. Investigators vow to never give up until these cases are solved, but very often, no additional clues are found. Number 10. Yellowstone National Park is a popular destination where people enjoy hiking, sightseeing, and spending time with their loved ones, but it can also be a very dangerous place. Many people have gone missing in the park over the decades and have never been found, but the park also contains other dangers. Yellowstone contains many hot springs, some of which reach very high temperatures. Many accidents have occurred around these springs, and people have not only sustained serious injuries, but have lost their lives after ending up in the water. The case concerning a missing man, 70-year-old Il-Hoon Rowe, who hails from Los Angeles, has been tied to one of these hot springs, but he's not been located despite a very macabre clue being found. On the 31st of July, 2022, Il-Hoon Rowe was spending time in the park, and it remains unknown whether he was alone. On that day, it became apparent that he had gone missing when his car was found abandoned in the West Thumb Geyser Basin, and a search was immediately started, but he could not be located. For the next 18 days, no one could figure out what happened to him, and it started to seem that the case may never be solved. But then, on the 18th of August, a startling discovery was made. A visitor to the park reported to rangers that they'd seen something floating in the Abyss Pool, and when they went to investigate, the rangers were shocked to discover a size 8.5 black shoe in the pool. But the most concerning thing was the fact that it contained a human foot. The pool was thoroughly searched, but no sign of the foot's owner was found. The incident was reported to the police, who handed the foot over to a laboratory so that analysis could be carried out. DNA was extracted from it, and it was then confirmed that the foot belonged to Il-Hoon Rowe, and further searches were conducted in the areas surrounding Abyss Pool, but to no avail. Park rangers have since announced that they believe he's no longer alive, and that he likely lost his life on the 31st of July. They also detailed their discovery of Rowe's car, stating that they had identified 3 vehicles in the area that were seemingly abandoned, but 2 were later claimed, and only Rowe's Kia Niro SUV remained. When it was searched, his laptop, photos, map, a book of poetry, and his wallet, which contained $447, were found. His driver's license was in his wallet, and rangers used it to ascertain that Rowe had booked a one-night stay at Canyon Lodge. It's been suggested that the man may have slipped and ended up in a 5-foot-deep hot spring from where he was unable to escape, but this has never been proven. Rowe's case has now been closed, and park officials have stated that they have no further information to share. Number 9. 60-year-old Robert Fitzgerald's name has been added to the long list of people who've gone missing in the wilderness, never to be seen again, and his family is desperate for answers as to what happened to him. In November of 2012, Robert was working at the Ply Gym in Stewart's Draft, Virginia, which is an exterior home building products manufacturer. He was also known to sometimes work out at the Staunton Augusta YMCA, and he maintained his fitness by jogging in the Gypsy Hill Park area. Investigators have stated that he visited his mother on the 12th of November 2012, and that he then visited a convenience store in Staunton. His mother assumed that he was heading home, but she never saw him again. When Robert failed to show up for work, his employer became concerned, and a missing person file was opened. The details surrounding his case have left his family and friends very concerned, since he seemed to have simply vanished into thin air. When those who knew Robert were questioned, it was determined that he and a female friend had spent time at Shenandoah Mountain on the day before he went missing. They went hiking on the Confederate Breastworks Trail, but also traversed several other trails in the area. This is evidenced by dashcam footage of the pair that was viewed by investigators, and which was recorded by a production company that was filming in the area that day. The woman would reveal that when they were out on their hike, Robert somehow misplaced his cell phone and shirt, but they were unable to find them. Investigators suspect that he decided to return to the mountain the next day to continue his search, and he never returned. It would later come to light that his phone had already been found by a hiker and handed in to the authorities. But it was noted that Robert was missing a few days later, on the 15th of August, when he missed his shift. He'd been working for Ply Gym for 3 decades and would usually let his employer know if he was going to be sick or late. But that was not the case on this occasion. Initial searches of the area resulted in Robert's car being found in the Confederate Breastworks parking lot. And inside, investigators found his backpack, a few bottles of water, energy bars, a rain poncho, and a flashlight. The resulting search effort lasted for 5 days, with more than 200 people scouring through a 4,500-acre area. Search dogs and a helicopter were brought in, as were searchers on horseback, but they were unable to figure out in which direction Robert walked, or what had happened to him. When his house in Staunton was searched, it was found in disarray. Old food was found inside his stove, and investigators have added that his car was also in what they called a mess. With no further clues found, there's been a lot of speculation as to what may have happened to Robert. The prevailing theory is that he got lost while looking for his possessions, and with his supplies being left in his car, he succumbed to hypothermia. Others have suggested that when bad weather hit the area, he tried to take a shortcut back to his car and sustained an injury that prevented him from finding help. If you have any information that could lead to him being found, you're asked to contact the Staunton Police Department at 540-332-3842. Number 8. When 50-year-old Juliet Stewart Points suddenly went missing in June of 1937, her friends were concerned, but since she was involved with the Soviet underground at the time, they'd grown accustomed to her being away for long periods. Hence, she was not officially reported as missing until 7 months later. But it's believed that by that time, it was already too late, and she'd likely lost her life. It's known that on the 5th of June that year, Juliet was living in an apartment at the American Women's Club in New York. It's also been revealed that on that day, she received a phone call from someone, and soon after hanging up the phone, she was seen walking out of the apartment, never to return. In October of that year, her landlord noted that she'd not been paying her rent, and that her mail had not been collected for 4 months. He contacted one of her friends, Marie McDonald, and informed her that Juliet was nowhere to be found. She then contacted an attorney named Elias Lieberman, who'd been working on Juliet's late husband's estate, and together they traveled to her apartment. Inside, they found nothing suspicious. The apartment was very clean and tidy. Her clothes and luggage were still in her closet, and her passport, ID, and bank book were all accounted for. For the next 3 months, Lieberman tried to figure out what had happened to Juliet by interviewing staff at the building, following up on calls that had been made to her phone in her absence, and checking her mail, but he found no answers. Juliet was finally reported as missing in December of that year, and it was immediately suspected that she was a double agent who'd been taken into custody by the Soviet secret police. Others suspected she'd been forcefully taken to Russia since she was involved with the Communist Party USA, known as CPUSA. She'd also been employed by the Soviet Secret Service at one point, and in 1936, she'd acquired a new passport under the name of Julia Stewart Glazer, after which she left the US for Europe. Upon her return, she informed Lieberman that the estate issue had to be resolved quickly, since she was in desperate need of money so that she could get away as soon as possible. The following year, he noticed she was growing increasingly anxious about something, likely the Stalin purges. Shortly before her disappearance, she told friends that she feared for her life, but she didn't elaborate. It's known that the last mysterious phone call that she received on the day of her disappearance was from a German-speaking man. Unfortunately, nothing further was ever found, and we may never learn what became of Juliet after she left her apartment that day. Number 7. 25-year-old Royal Air Force Captain Mansell R. James, who hailed from Ontario, Canada, was known to be an expert aviator. He was a member of the Royal Air Force in World War I, during which he shot down 11 enemy planes, and he was highly regarded by his peers. His love for flying extended beyond the military, though, and in May of 1919, he traveled to the US to enter a competition that had been organized by the Boston Globe. The newspaper was looking to find a pilot who could set a record flight time between Atlantic City, Boston, and New Jersey, and James felt he could earn that title. Not only would he receive the Globe Trophy and further acclaim and fame, but the winner would also receive a prize of $1,000, which was a small fortune back then. On the 18th of May that year, he took off in his Sopwith Camel single-seat biplane. He was very comfortable with the craft, since it was the same type that he'd flown during the war, and he made the trip from Atlantic City to Boston with ease. He reached an average overall speed of 115 miles per hour, which was a new record that overshadowed the previous fastest speed of 90 miles per hour. He was slated by news outlets as the favorite to walk away with the prize money, and no one dared argue given the result of the first leg of his flight. He then flew to Saugus in Massachusetts, where he needed to have his air ballast tank refilled, but he discovered an issue with the plane's compass before taking off. He wouldn't let this issue delay him though, and he decided to navigate to New Jersey with the aid of railway tracks instead. At around 6 p.m. that evening, he took off once again, but he made a fatal error. While flying over Boston, he became confused by the railroad tracks and ended up following the Boston and Albany Railroad rather than the New York, New Haven, and Hartford Railroad as he had intended. Rather than heading for New Jersey, he started flying towards Massachusetts, and at about 90 minutes later, he landed in Tyringham. He likely realized his error, but decided not to take off again that night, choosing to stay over in Tyringham instead. The next morning, he headed towards Long Island in New York as he wanted to land at Mitchell Field, where he could refuel his plane. He would then resume the rest of the journey to New Jersey, and before taking off, he stated that he'd be following the Housatonic River. But he never arrived, and it was speculated that he changed his plans and decided to fly to Toronto, Canada. When he remained missing, a search was organized, but no one had any idea where to start looking for James, since it was unknown what direction he had taken. Since his plane's compass wasn't working, he could have ended up crashing in a forested area, and many of these were searched but with no positive result. It was suggested that he crashed into the Housatonic River, but this was merely a guess. Several leads have been followed up on in the years that have since passed, but no sign of James has ever been found, and his fate remains unknown to this day. Number 6. The tale of the Abu Bakari expedition, which took place in the 1300s, is a very strange one, filled with speculation about the edge of the world and an empire that at the time may have been the richest on Earth. It concerns Abu Bakari II, the ruler of the Mali Empire, who started ruling the country in 1310. As part of his title, he controlled most of the western part of the African continent, and his kingdom was a very strong one, with more than 1 million people living under his rule. Most of the kingdom's riches came from gold mines, of which Abu Bakari had 3, and flats that proved to be extremely profitable. But the new ruler wasn't content with merely sitting on his throne and enriching people. He wanted to find out more about the outside world of Africa. To do this, he ordered that 200 boats should be sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to ascertain whether it had an end, and if so, to find out what lay beyond. He knew that it would likely be a perilous journey, and so he ordered that several different types of boats be built, each of which was accompanied by a supply barge. Each of the barges contained grain, dried meat, and preserved fruit that would last up to 2 years. They were also given gold, cotton, and other items to trade along the way, in case they met someone with whom they could do business. Abu Bakari waited patiently for the boats to return, but was dismayed when only one made it back. The captain of that boat stated that they'd been sailing for what felt like an eternity when the group of sailors came across what he described as a river in the middle of the ocean. He added that it had an extremely strong current that took hold of the boats and washed them away into the distance. One after the other, the boats entered this stretch of water, and all but one were swept away by the current. The captain ordered the boat that he was on to turn around, and he could only watch as the rest of the men were swept away, never to be seen again. By the time he made it back to Mali, he was alone, and the fate of the rest of the sailors was unknown. The tale intrigued Abu Bakari, and in 1311, he decided he needed to see this river with his own eyes. He left his kingdom in the hands of his half-brother, Musa, and assembled a second expedition, this time taking 2,000 ships instead of just 200. When all the barges and supplies were ready, he and a large number of sailors set sail from what is known today as the Gambia, and his subjects waited with bated breath for his return. But their wait was in vain. Abu Bakari and his fleet never returned, and ever since, speculation has been rife as to what happened to them. Number 5. In 1982, Aylin J. Lawrence Barrick, who was known to her friends as Orla, became a widow when her husband passed away, and she would remain a widow until the age of 61, when in 1996 the baffling case of her disappearance started. She was described as a very organized woman who had a very set routine, and who rarely deviated from it. In April of 1996, she was living in a cottage in Edmonson County, Kentucky, close to the Nolan River, and she had a small dog called Fifi to keep her company. On the 12th of April that year, she left her home in the morning to visit a chiropractor with whom she had an appointment. When the consultation was completed, she visited a tanning salon and then traveled to the house of a handyman who was doing some work for her at the cottage. Her family believes she then went home, but they were dismayed when Orla called them to state that she would not be traveling to Frankfurt to visit her brother Pete as planned. She spoke to Pete's wife, who did not ask for a reason for the cancellation. It's known that she then left the cottage again at around 2:30 p.m. to walk Fifi. She was often seen walking her dog in the area surrounding Mammoth Cave National Park, and she did so again on that day. A group of teenagers would later report that they saw Orla, and she stopped to talk to them outside their cabin. She and Fifi then returned home, and it's assumed that she was getting ready for bed as she'd drawn the blinds, replaced the trash liner in her bin, removed her dentures, and started smoking a cigarette. On the weekend that followed, she never emerged from her cottage, which concerned her neighbor, and on Monday, he contacted the police to request a wellness check. The Kentucky State Police responded, and after finding the cottage locked, they forced their way in. They found no signs that someone had broken in, but the cottage was in disarray, with items strewn across the floor. Fifi was found unharmed in her crate. Orla's car was still parked in the driveway, and her keys were accounted for, but there was no sign of her. A closer inspection of her bedroom revealed trace amounts of biological material, and that the top sheet of her bed linens, as well as her purse, was missing. This was of great concern for Orla's well-being, and so a search was immediately started. The areas around her house contained no clues as to what happened, and it was decided that the ponds and other areas containing water should be searched. Scuba divers scoured lakes and ponds, but again, came up empty. It's been suggested that Orla's handyman was involved with her disappearance, but no evidence has been found. Anyone who has any information on this case should contact the Kentucky State Police Bowling Green Station at 270-782-2010. Number 4. In 2018, 22-year-old Gavin Octaviano was known to be an extremely intelligent and friendly man who was studying biology in San Francisco. He was extremely dedicated to his studies, but in November of that year, he traveled to his family's home to celebrate Thanksgiving with them. The following day, he and his family decorated their Christmas tree, and later that evening, he decided to go to dinner with a few of his friends and his cousin. He told his mother that he wouldn't be staying out late, and that she would see him later on before leaving in his sister's car. But when he hadn't returned by the next morning, his family became concerned, since he would have contacted them if he intended to sleep over somewhere. They called the police and filed a missing person report so that a search could be conducted. The border between San Francisco and Dali was searched, but he wasn't located. On the 23rd of November, the police found footage of Gavin's sister, Mercedes, as it was being parked in the northern parking lot of the Golden Gate Bridge at around 5:20 p.m. And when investigators traveled there, they found the car where Gavin had left it. A witness would contact his family on the 28th of November to report that he'd seen Gavin's missing person flyer, and immediately recognized him as the young man that he'd seen near the Golden Gate Tunnel on the night of the 23rd. He remembered the sighting well because he almost hit Gavin with his car when he unexpectedly stumbled into the road, seemingly intoxicated. His family believes that he decided to park the car and go for a walk, as this was his habit whenever he'd been drinking and needed some fresh air. In the months that followed, Gavin's family was not pleased with the response from the police, since they were not kept up to date with the case's progress. They also felt that the media wasn't helpful, since they had to convince a news station to run a story about Gavin's disappearance, and this wasted valuable time. The family also had to deal with unfounded speculation, such as that his friends had attacked him and ended his life, and some people even discouraged them from searching for him, stating he was likely no longer alive. It should be noted, foul play is not suspected in Gavin's case, but it's also not been ruled out. If you've spotted Gavin or know where he might be, you're asked to get in touch with his family at 415-672-8929. Number 3. According to those who knew her, 33-year-old Garnet Jen was a respected home economics teacher at Portland High School in 1950, and she was popular among her students as well as her fellow teachers. She was in the midst of obtaining her master's degree, and according to her friends and family, she was looking forward to the next chapter in her life. She was always punctual, which is why her coworkers became concerned when she failed to show up for work on the 28th of February that year. The school's office called her home phone, but got no answer, and the superintendent decided to travel to her house to check up on her. He could never have foreseen what he found upon his arrival, and he immediately contacted the authorities. He reported that after he got no answer at Garnet's front door, he walked to the garage and managed to look through a window, and to his horror, he saw Garnet hanging from the handle of her car door. When the police made it into the garage, they found that she had a belt from a sewing machine around her neck, and she was perched on one knee. While it was immediately suggested the case was an open and shut one, her family felt otherwise, and Garnet's remains were exhumed a few days later. A second inspection of her remains revealed to a pathologist that she'd been attacked and strangled, escalating it into a murder case instead. It would later be revealed that she was last seen on the night of the attack when she attended a sorority meeting at the local golf club. Before heading home, she asked everyone in attendance whether she could buy them a drink since she had $40 with her, and then left. It was reported by the police that they could not locate Garnet's wallet or driver's license, both of which were likely stolen by her attacker. Unfortunately, by the time the case was reclassified as a homicide, many people had been to Garnet's home, and any evidence that might have been present in the garage had been contaminated by curious visitors. Furthermore, the small amount of evidence that was gathered was improperly stored and mishandled, making any chance of identifying the culprit just about impossible. The sewing machine, Garnet's torn jacket, and her gloves were collected, and it was noted that there was biological material on the outside of her car. When the case was revisited years later, though, all of the physical evidence that had been gathered had been lost, and so any existing DNA that might have been present could not be found. But investigators never gave up hope that something would be found one day, and in 2019 they received information that some physical evidence might exist elsewhere, though the authorities have declined to elaborate on this lead. It's now hoped that DNA will be found and Garnet's attacker will finally be identified so that he can face the consequences of his actions. A person of interest has been identified, though the man's name has not been released to the public. For now, Garnet's case remains unsolved, but hope remains that this will change soon. Number 2. Investigators have been unable to find out what happened in the case involving Betty Gale Brown, a 19-year-old woman from Lexington, Kentucky, whose life was ended in October of 1961. At the time, she was a sophomore at Transylvania College, and her fellow classmates will report that they saw her leaving a biology lesson, and that nothing seemed to be bothering her. She was her usual lighthearted and friendly self when she walked away from class that day. It's also known that she spent the rest of that day studying well into the night, and just before midnight, she got in her car and started driving to her parents' home for a visit, but she never arrived. At 3 a.m. the next morning, the police made a startling discovery. They found Betty deceased in her car, which was parked in front of the old Morrison building. She'd been attacked and strangled with her own bra, and a homicide investigation was launched. The incident was reported on by every news outlet in Kentucky, and her family and friends were left devastated. The first step in the investigation was to interview all the male students and faculty members at the college, but no suspects were identified. One lead that was followed up on came from New York when an ex-Transylvania college student was arrested, and when his room was searched, newspaper clippings of Betty's case were found, but it would later come to light that he'd been sent the clippings by a friend, and that he was in no way involved. Other small leads were received from different areas around the country, and they were all followed up on, but to no avail, and Betty's case went cold. But in 1966, it seemed as though the authorities had made a breakthrough. A man named Alec Arnold Jr. came forward to report that he may be responsible for ending Betty's life. He stated that on that night he'd been drinking heavily and that he was looking for somewhere to sleep it off. He ended up walking onto the campus and saw Betty's car parked where it was eventually found. He noticed that she was in the company of an unidentified woman, and when he approached them, they told him to leave them alone. This irked him, and he opened Betty's door before attacking her. The other woman fled, but he managed to overpower Betty, and he ended her life. Arnold was arrested, but he pleaded not guilty at his trial, since he was no longer sure that he was the culprit. The defense argued that everything Arnold knew about the case had been reported in newspapers, and that he likely read these reports before convincing himself that he'd carried out the crime. He has since passed away, and if he truly was the attacker, he took that secret to his grave. For a while, it was suspected that serial killer Nolan Ray George was responsible since he was active in the area at the time, but this could not be proven since he was never questioned about the case. Betty's case remains a mystery decades later. Number 1. 40 years after Tamara Tigard was attacked and her life was ended, investigators were able to make some progress in her case. But many questions still remain unanswered, as the person responsible for ending her life has never been identified. In 1980, Tamara was 20 years old and living in Las Vegas. The details surrounding her initial case are vague at best, but it's known that she was reported missing, likely in March of that year, and her case would continue to perplex the police for many years to come. On the 18th of April that year, a woman was found deceased on a riverbank by 2 fishermen in Oklahoma, and the crime scene contained some very interesting clues. She was undressed, she'd been attacked with a firearm, and her attacker had covered her in lime powder, likely to mask any resulting odors and to speed up decomposition, which is a misconception. Luckily for the police, the lime had preserved the remains very well, but they had no idea who the woman was, and she was listed as a deceased Jane Doe. She would eventually become known as the Lime Lady when her case remained unsolved for decades. The clues that were found at the scene indicated that her attacker had approached her from the front, and some fiber evidence was collected from a coin that she had in her pocket. The coin was struck when the firearm was discharged, and some of her clothing fibers were left behind. The case went cold until 2020, when another effort was made to identify the Lime Lady. DNA was collected and sent to the DNA Doe Project, which managed to identify the woman's cousins. It was then discovered that Tamara was the Lime Lady, and this was confirmed through dental records obtained from the US Army after it was learned that she'd served in the military at one point. Investigators finally linked the Lime Lady's case to Tamara's, and they were told that she'd been missing since March of 1980. It was reported that on that day she stepped out of her house in Las Vegas to go for a walk, and was never seen or heard from again. Her friends and family could not explain why she had traveled to Oklahoma, but it came to light that she may have visited a bar in Jones that was known to be frequented by bikers. Furthermore, the missing person case was never followed up on, since a woman in Ohio had stolen Tamara's identity, and it was assumed that she'd been located. This incident was investigated, but found to have no connection to the rest of Tamara's case, and the woman in question was never arrested. Her cousins would tell the police that they knew Tamara had gone missing decades earlier, but they'd inexplicably been told that she'd entered the witness protection program, which simply isn't true. They've asked that anyone with helpful information come forward, so that the culprit in this case can be identified, and anyone who believes that they can help progress Tamara's case can contact the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation at 800-522-8017.